Studies have shown that anywhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 adults have suffered either emotional, physical, or sexual abuse during their childhood. The majority of videos that you're going to find on inner child work and reparenting our damaged younger self are very well-meaning and provide so much practical advice, but the major shortcoming is that they don't go heavy enough. This video is going to talk about using inner child work for the capital traumas. I'm talking abuse, devastation, terror, and the constant threat of losing one's life in childhood. These are situations where the family environment or extended environment was a chronic, low-grade or even high-grade terror, which still lives inside of us as anxiety, mistrust, and general hostility either internally or externally, which strips us of an ability to be happy and joyful and feel free. So if that sounds like too much for you, if that sounds like something which isn't relevant for you, then skip this episode of Inner Work Essentials, because it's going to be raw and it's going to be heavy. I'm very aware, in having just YouTubed around and seeing what's out there currently, that it's a bit different to even see a man talking about this topic, because I haven't got my own kids. I don't look like someone who would need to do child work. In fact, some might even say that's kind of soft. That's a bit of a weak thing to do as a man, but I'd be selling myself short to not present with as much depth and as much heaviness as is required for anyone who's watching this who has suffered immensely during their childhood. It's all very well and good to have great imaginal states and to have invitations towards playfulness and jubilance and giggling through the fields and reconnecting with crayons and Legos and Play-Doh, and I get it. I get why that is the solution that's offered. But how do we move from imprisonment and terror to the liberation of a truly happy inner child if we haven't experienced a happy childhood? That's the key question of this video. The way that I'm going to go about this is by focusing on the very best of what I've learned from today's Inner Work Essential, which is Homecoming by John Bradshaw. Very rarely will I make a strong statement like this, but this book is without a doubt the best single source inner child book out there. Bradshaw is fantastic in his depth of compassion and level of insight into not only the inner child as a single concept, a single archetypal or mythic structure, but he really makes the effort to define the different areas of childhood and how we experience traumas and we experience loss through different perceptions at different times. So this is the first idea I want to go into. The inner child is not a single concept. The trauma and damage and imprisonment and loss that we experience at age 5 is different from 15, and it's different from being in utero. The very first episode of Inner Work Essentials was talking about embryology and the kind of damage that we can experience in the toxic womb in a literal sense. I'm not throwing that word around idly. I mean the damage we experience inside of a mother who is stressed, battered, addicted, or otherwise hurting herself and hurting us while we are carried inside of her. Often these situations are overlooked, but the patterns tend to repeat over the years that follow, either with divorces or abuses or neglect. I don't need to create a suffering montage for you to get the idea. The reason that I start with this concept in terms of liberating our inner child is that we need to understand that the inner child is not a singular entity which we can relate to as if they were one figure. It's not that simple. The majority of people who I support in inner child work, they'll typically constellate around a certain age, Maybe we'll go into a visualization exercise when we start to meet the inner child, and they'll see themselves age 8. They'll see themselves age 13. They'll meet a central figure, and that tends to be the core archetypal version that they will work with. And then gradually over time, they'll go forwards or backwards along the timeline and work in almost parallel realities in the imaginal state. The imaginal state is one of the core underpinnings to accessing and accepting and acknowledging all of that frozen trauma which is polluting their nervous system. But the real secret to liberating an inner child, in addition to understanding the mechanics of trauma on a somatic level, which we've explored in 2 previous episodes of Inner Work Essentials, is to not expect that you can get the same results as someone who's experienced little t trauma of being a bit neglected by mommy or daddy, or having some friends teasing them at school. I'm not trying to belittle these experiences, but there is obviously a huge chasm between low-grade conflict in the household and being told to do things that you dislike, and being beaten or taken advantage of. It's a really difficult topic to talk about. I don't see many therapeutic supports openly talking about these topics online because it's a hard space to go into, but I'm here to say that inner child work and liberating your inner child is possible, but to have the patience and understanding that you will not get the same results as someone who's experienced far less damage and wounding in anywhere near as quick a time. The second concept that I want to go into is the idea of how do we actually access playfulness and all of the positive qualities of the archetypal inner child. How do we access giggling? Sounds crazy, right? Like, here I am as a grown man saying, how do I access giggling? Do I really want to be a giggly man? Well, no, that's not the point. I'm not saying that we re-access these qualities and become possessed by a childlike nature which we can't modulate and manage and know when it's appropriate. But I guarantee that the majority of men and women who are watching this who have particularly abusive traumatic histories have a certain degree of internalized parental voice or cultural voice which keeps them bound in shame and heaviness. So the idea of giggling and skipping and playing around in the park is not only alien, it's very likely that you might have a response where you'll outright condemn that as ridiculous. You'll even perhaps think that childishness or childlike play is a complete waste of time. It's something which is weak, something which is beneath you. And of course, why is that? Well, it's because it wasn't allowed. It wasn't encouraged. Things were harder and heavier, and it can create an alienating sense of misunderstanding when trying to access the inner child realm from the conventional literature that's out there, which thinks that it's all about play as the resolution. It's not about play as the resolution. It's about safety first. The inner child needs to feel safe before he or she can naturally start playing again. This means several things. In terms of establishing safety as an adult, I'll go with men first. There's differences between men and women. With men, I've noticed a pattern that there tends to be a requirement to build up the physical body. There tends to be a requirement to establish some level of strength and musculature to feel like we are strong and safe, especially if there was physical abuse, that we can fight back, that we can protect ourselves. Until that core energetic truth is established, I don't think there's any amount of spiritual bypassing or Jungian parts work which is going to overwrite the obvious physical lack of being unhealthy or weak physically and unable to defend ourselves. It's almost as if the inner child requires, let's say a 6-year-old inner child requires the understanding that you and I, or myself and another man, need to be fit and strong and able to actually step in and protect us from those abusive moments. I don't think we can avoid this, and that is a controversial idea in this space. This space would suggest that we can do it all in the imaginal and we can skip straight towards playfulness. I don't think this is possible. I'm going to give an example with women which won't apply to every woman, but it has come up repeatedly enough in the client work that I've been a part of. This is when it comes to sexual abuse. When it comes to transgression at ages where we couldn't defend ourselves, there's no replacement for healing the womb space and being in healthy sexual relationship to ourself primarily, or to the woman primarily for herself, to recreate that same sense of safety and boundaried protection. There needs to be a felt understanding that nobody is allowed into this space unless I invite them into this space. And again, this requires daily actions and a general lifestyle where we aren't self-betraying that inner child by inviting people inside of us who shouldn't be there and trigger back traumatic memories of what was done before. These are huge topics. It's a huge conversation. I know it's really heavy. If you haven't experienced these things, I may seem so intense right now, but for those who have felt this, for the little boys and little girls inside of us that lived in terror for many years, I know that these words land as true. They don't want to be sold lies and sold pretend ideas of playfulness as an immediate possibility. We need to establish safety first. We need to understand that our present bodies as adults need to have behaviors and boundaries and new ways of being before we can possibly go into inner child work at the level that we want to go to. This means being strong and fit and capable, and it also means being in structured and safe environments where that inner child can truly peek out from behind the shadows. I wish it were easier. I wish I could say to you that giggling and skipping and all of the wonderful qualities of childhood that maybe you didn't experience could be immediately reaccessible. But it's about titration. Firstly, it's establishing a safe container, and then gradually over time we can start doing things like going for walks more often, or being more playful in our training, or having more playful sing-song moments with ourselves throughout the day, or dancing and reaccessing all of the somatic work. That does come and that is possible. I've experienced it myself. But this took me several years of consistent work. Patient and persistent reparenting. There's no shortcut. There's no solution that comes with any kind of imaginal work when there's so much heaviness in the body. We need to work at every single level of our being, and it's really difficult. It's really difficult, but it's so worth it. It is possible to liberate our inner child. It is possible to heal the wounding of the past. But again, we need to want to do it, and we need to honor ourselves with the boundaries that we set in our everyday adult lives to make that internal reality overlay in a way where there's no story gap. There can't be a gap between perception and felt reality. We'll work on it over time. So, just keep going. It's been quite a hard video to film, but I hope the points come across. And if you do want to talk about these things, best place to reach me is on Instagram. I'm around to have these chats or go deeper into the work with you. In the meantime, to be paradoxical and contrasting, if you want to go into these imaginal realms, if you want to do parts work in a way that John Bradshaw would suggest with this highly regarded book, please read this book. It is, again, the best inner child workbook out there. We can do work in the dream state. In fact, for me, the first time that I properly started contacting my inner child was in the dream state. I started setting dream intentions and recalling the things that were blocked out a bit from memory. And that was really the entry point for me. And then I'd start bringing in concrete actions to change those patterns. So if you want to learn how to use the dream state for either the inner child or any of the other archetypal figures that we've explored in the last few episodes, then click on over to the next episode. We're going to look at inner work from a Dreamtime perspective and how to use dream intentions and dream journaling and everyday practice to take your introspection to that next level. I'll see you over there.